On November 4th, 1966, 56 years and 2 days ago, a small group of Unitarian Universalists broke ground on this campus to build a building. We are here today because of their commitment to being a liberal, progressive presence in Santa Cruz County. Their commitment and dedication and perseverance carried them through some very stressful conflicts, divisive arguments, and changes they didn't see coming. They had huge arguments about dealing with change, changes that challenged them to take a position on critical issues of the time, like nomenclature of the time, gay rights, the Vietnam War, the nuclear arms race, immigration, pollution, disruptive members, and how to have a social justice force in this community. I've been reading and researching the written and oral history of this congregation for almost 10 years. And I can say this, the decisions and behaviors of our fellowship founders were not always made with love, compassion, and consideration of everyone's inherent worth and dignity. Our fellowship history is one of arguments, schisms, conflict, and power struggles. But through it all, a core of people hung together, kept working to live out the basic Unitarian Universalist principles. Interesting note about change, when that group formed in 1966, there were 6 UU principles. Since then, they've all been rewritten and there are now 7. Change. The worship theme for the month of November is change, a subject that challenged our fellowship ancestors and continue to challenge us. Now, in my experience, most people hate change. And those who may not openly hate it fall into the category of initially rejecting change. Oh yeah, there are those rare individuals who embrace change. But we are living in an era of extraordinary rate of change, and the magnitude of change is something like I've never experienced in my life, that even the most change-loving people are screaming, enough already, enough. Change is coming faster than we can comprehend. COVID, economic inequality, political division, fake news, explosion of fake news, wild conspiracy theories that get repeated over and over again, climate crisis, artificial intelligence, the 1% exerting unbelievable influence on all 3 branches of our government, the rise of authoritarian leaders who are using historical strategies to gain and keep power. What is our reaction to being overwhelmed with changes? We're human. We become afraid. Afraid of what might happen. Afraid of what could happen when. Afraid of who might get elected. And the most disturbing dimension of our increasing fear for me is that we are being manipulated. Our increasing fear is now a political strategy, using our fear to get our votes. But here's the real disturbing part for me. Many studies in neuroscience show that when we are afraid, at least 3 things happen to us. We become more accepting of authoritarianism. We exert pressure on others to conform. And we become more prejudiced. When we are afraid, we accept more authoritarianism. We exert pressure on others to conform, and we have more prejudice ourselves. I see these 3 consequences of being afraid appearing not only in our own country, across both political parties, but also on a global level. Fear can influence groups, communities, countries, the world. It can consume us, depress us, lead to poor decision making, and have us make knee-jerk reactions. The list goes on and on. This is the cost of being human and manipulated by fear. And in the worst case scenarios, it results in war. War between countries, between nations, even between alliances of nations. Our history is filled with gut-wrenching dilemmas of wanting peace while being totally afraid of being destroyed by our perceived enemies. This is the basis of war. Being afraid of what your enemies might do. Too often based on facts of atrocities. The dilemma of wanting peace, but also being afraid of being destroyed, is a terrible dilemma. A terrible angst for liberal, progressive, religious people who openly say over and over again that violence never solves anything. But in a globally complex world, can we always walk away from violence? On the 11th day of the 11th hour, on the 11th month in 1918, an armistice between the Allied forces and Germany was signed. The fighting ceased. The war wasn't over until January of 1920 when the truce, but an armistice was signed. The Treaty of Versailles ended the war. November 11th became the day to signify the end of the most horrific war fighting in human history and was called the War to End All Wars. But, you know your history, but in 1954, President Eisenhower, who was a 5-star general and the supreme commander of the Allied expeditionary forces in Europe during World War II, he knew war. He changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. The reported reason was that the Great War, the war to end all wars, did not end all wars. So the holiday was changed to honor veterans. Veterans Day evolved from celebrating the end of all wars to honoring the men and women who keep war from destroying us. I'm against war, but I'm not anti-military. I'm against violence. But I believe we need a properly equipped armed forces to keep me living freely with my anti-violent stance. This is a dilemma for me. My freedom exists, my hatred of violence exists because of veterans' sacrifices. The next big dilemma is, what is an adequate military? It's common to criticize examples of extreme expenditures and the cost of a toilet seat. But what is an adequate military? What is enough to keep us safe? What can be done to constrain the military spending to be effective and efficient? Going back to President Eisenhower, his farewell address is worth reading. January 1961. Famously, he warned of the rise of the military-industrial complex. Maybe you've heard that, but it's incomplete and really unfair to only cite those few words. I'm going to read a little bit more. He spoke on that day, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or our democratic process. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together." Those words for me, so that security and liberty may prosper together. For me, that says we need an adequate military in proper balance with our other national needs. Do we even need a military? There are countries without a military. They have police forces, but not a real armed forces with military. In fact, there are 31 countries in the world without a military force. But each of those countries is protected by a large, more powerful country who has a strong military. Costa Rica has no army, but is protected by the United States. French Polynesia, there's no military, but France is responsible for protecting their territory. Greenland has no military, but Denmark is responsible for the defense of their land. We live in a world that is so rapidly changing. The war in Ukraine, the war in Tigray. I just learned this week, 600,000 people have died in Tigray in the last 2 years. The rise of authoritarian leaders in this world, the rise of authoritarian political speeches in this United States, the climate crisis. We are on the cusp of being overwhelmed with fear. Will our fears result in us being accepting of more authoritarianism? Will our fears have us exert more pressures on people to conform? Will we have more prejudices? Eisenhower warned us, only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals. But being an alert and knowledgeable citizenry means that we all must, and we must be diverse when gathering our facts. Don't listen to only sources of news that you already agree with. Seek out other opinions. We must talk, listen, and discuss with other people facts, policies, events, and concerns. We need to be in dialogue. And most importantly, we must all vote. Today's message is about honoring our veterans. It is also about how seeing your individual response to change affects the much larger community. And the message is we must build up a foundation of resilience to the major changes that are happening, and there's many more already queued up coming at us. Our fellowship founders faced very challenging times. We are living in very challenging times. Our religious ancestors here hung together and allowed us to be here today. Let's stay together. Let's walk together into our collective future, so that those who come after us will be able to face the challenges of their times. Face those challenges with love and compassion. Amen, and blessed be.